The stagecoach rattled over the dry earth, its wooden wheels groaning as it cut across the endless prairie. Dust rose behind it in a long trail that vanished into the horizon, where the sun burned low and red against the sky. Inside, a young woman sat with her gloved hands folded tight in her lap, her heart beating faster than the horses pulling the carriage. She was leaving everything familiar behind the small town, her mother's kitchen with the smell of bread, the sound of her father's voice calling in from the fields. Ahead waited a marriage she had agreed to only in letters, a new life with a man she had never met face to face. She repeated to herself that this was the path she had chosen, that this was her chance for a future. But still, the knots in her stomach only grew tighter with every passing mile. Outside the window, the land stretched out wide and lonely. Scattered cabins stood like weary sentinels in the distance, smoke rising in faint spirals from their chimneys. The prairie grass swayed in the evening wind, whispering secrets of a place older and wilder than any she had known. It was not a place of comfort, but of survival. The driver flicked the reins, and the horses quickened their pace. She pressed her lips together and wondered if the man waiting at the ranch would be kind, if he would even smile when he saw her. When the stage finally stopped at a lonely outpost, her heart leapt. The driver tipped his hat and told her this was the end of the line. She stepped down, clutching her carpet bag, squinting against the setting sun. A man stood waiting by the corral fence. His hat shaded his face, but she could see the sharp set of his jaw and the broadness of his shoulders. For a moment she thought she might faint from the rush of nerves. She steadied herself, lifted her chin, and walked toward him. The stranger introduced himself with a gruff tone, his eyes dark and unreadable. His handshake was firm but distant. He did not say much, only took her bag and nodded toward the wagon that would carry her to the ranch. Something about his silence unsettled her, but she tried to believe it was only her nerves. She had no choice but to follow. The wagon jolted down the dirt path, winding deeper into the country where the hills grew taller and the shadows longer. She tried to catch her breath, but the weight of doubt pressed harder. When they reached the ranch house, the truth sank in, slow and sharp. This was not the place she had been promised. The buildings were weathered, patched with rough timber, nothing like the tidy homestead described in the letters she had clutched so tightly. The man before her was not the man she had expected. His name was different, his manner colder, and his home harsher. She felt the ground slip beneath her. Some mistake had been made. Or perhaps something far worse. That night, as the wind howled against the shutters, she lay awake on a narrow bed in a dim room. Her chest ached with fear and confusion. She thought of the man she was meant to marry, wondering where he was, if he waited at another ranch, puzzled that she had not arrived. She wondered if she had been deceived, sold off like cattle to a stranger who did not care about the promises written on paper. Mind circled in endless questions, and the walls seemed to close tighter around her. The next morning her unease deepened. The ranch hands moved about with low voices, avoiding her gaze. The man she now lived under spoke little and worked her to exhaustion with chores meant to test her strength. Still, she clung to the belief that she must endure, that she must find a way to survive. She could not return to the town she had left. She could not shame her family with failure. She had no choice but to stay at least until she could understand what had gone wrong. But one afternoon, when the sky grew heavy with clouds and the air turned restless, her world shifted again. She had wandered too far beyond the fence, desperate for air, for freedom, for even a glimpse of the world outside her cage. That was when she heard the softest sound, a whisper carried on the wind. She turned, startled, and her eyes widened at the sight before her. A towering figure stood among the trees at the edge of the land, his presence both fierce and calm. His dark eyes held her, steady and unwavering, yet his lips moved with words. Spoken low and gentle. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "You're safe here." Her breath caught in her throat. The stories she had been told of the Apache filled her mind, tales of danger, of raids, of wildness beyond reason. But nothing in those fearful words matched the man before her. He was strong, yes, but not cruel. His voice carried not threat, but promise. He looked at her as though he knew her fear, as though he could see through the armor she tried to wear. The wind stirred the grass between them, and she felt the weight of the moment pressing down. She should have run back to the ranch, back to the safety of walls and rules she understood, yet her feet stayed rooted in place. Something deeper than fear held her still. The world around them seemed to hush, waiting, as if time itself leaned closer to hear what would happen next. Her heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had appeared, and how he could claim she was safe when nothing in her life felt steady anymore. But the words tangled in her throat, leaving her only silence. The Apache's gaze did not falter. He stepped closer, slow and measured, like a man who understood the fragility of trust. The distance between them narrowed. The air grew thick with questions she dared not speak aloud. The ranch house stood far behind her, its roof barely visible over the rise of land. She thought of the man inside, the one who claimed her, though she did not belong to him. She thought of the life promised but stolen, the letters that now felt like lies. And here before her was a stranger who seemed less stranger than all the rest. She did not know if she could believe him. She did not know if safety was more than a word whispered in the dusk, yet something in her heart shifted, pulling her toward the unknown. Away from the path she had thought was written for her, the sky darkened with the promise of storm, thunder murmuring in the distance. The Apache's voice lingered in her ears, steady, certain, unyielding. She felt herself caught between two worlds, one she could not return to, and one she could not yet step into. The wind rose, carrying the scent of rain, and in that moment, she understood nothing in her life would ever be the same again. She had been sent to the wrong ranch. Perhaps she had been led to the right destiny. And still, she stood frozen, unable to move as the storm broke and the choice before her grew sharper with every heartbeat. The thunder roared overhead. The earth trembled beneath her feet. And the Apache's words echoed once more, this time louder, closer, a vow she could not ignore. The rain broke in heavy sheets, drumming against the earth and soaking through her dress in an instant. She blinked against the water streaming down her face, her eyes locked on the towering figure before her. He stood unmoved, like the storm itself could not touch him, his dark hair clinging to his shoulders, his gaze steady as stone. The ranch was too far now, the path back blurred by the downpour. She knew she should run, but her legs would not carry her. Something stronger than fear held her there, as if the whisper he had spoken had routed her to the ground. He lifted his hand, not fast, not sharp, but slow, deliberate, as though calming a frightened colt. The gesture was simple, but it carried a weight that made her chest ache. She felt the pull of it, the unspoken promise that he meant no harm. Yet her mind swirled with all she had been told. Tales told in hushed voices at the hearth, warnings. From her father about the Apache who lived beyond the hills, stories meant to frighten a child into staying close to home. She had believed those tales, had carried them like stones in her pocket. Now faced with the truth of a man before her, those stones felt heavier than ever. Lightning flashed, throwing the world into stark white for a heartbeat. In that moment, she saw him clearly, the broad lines of his shoulders, the scars carved across his arms, the quiet strength etched into his face. He was not what she had been told to fear. He was more and far harder to name. She wanted to speak, to ask him why he had come. But thunder cracked above and stole her voice away. When he finally stepped closer, she did not move back. Her heart thrashed inside her ribs, but her feet stayed firm. His presence was overwhelming, yet there was no cruelty in his eyes. Only calm, only certainty. Then, without touching her, without demanding anything, he turned slightly and motioned toward the hills beyond. The message was clear. It was offering her a way out. Her breath caught. Could she follow him? Could she trust the hand of a man who was supposed to be an enemy? Behind her, the ranch walls loomed like a cage, the cold silence of the man who claimed her pressing in her memory. Ahead, through the rain and shadows, was a path she could not see clearly, led only by a stranger who spoke in whispers. She hesitated too long, and when she blinked, he was gone. The rain still poured, the earth still trembled, but the place Where he had stood was empty. She spun in a circle, searching, but there was nothing. Only the swaying trees, the rushing water. The storm carrying his presence away. Shaken, she stumbled back toward the ranch, her dress clinging heavy to her skin, her hair plastered to her face. Her teeth chattered, though not only from the cold. Every step felt hollow, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. Had she truly seen him, or had the storm conjured him from her fear? But no, she had heard him, clear and strong, words that lingered in her ears even now. Don't be afraid. You're safe here. Back inside the ranch house, the fire crackled weak in the hearth. The man she had been left with barely looked at her when she returned. His face was shadowed by lamplight, his jaw set in silence. Did not ask where she had gone, did not care that she was dripping water onto the worn floorboards. He only muttered about the storm spoiling the work for the day, then left her to peel off her wet clothes and sit alone by the fire. That night, she did not sleep. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. She thought of the letters she had carried across the miles, the tender words promised to her, the vision of a home she had dreamed of. And she thought of how quickly it had all turned to ash when she stepped off that stagecoach. Wrong ranch, wrong man, wrong life, but the figure in the rain, he had not felt wrong. Days passed, each one stretched thin with chores and silence. She fetched water, scrubbed floors, mended shirts that were not hers, all the while feeling like a ghost walking through someone else's life. The ranch hands kept their eyes low, their words short. She wondered if they knew, if they saw her, as misplaced, a stranger caught in a net she had not woven. Still, she could not forget the whisper. Sometimes when she walked to the edge of the fields, she thought she saw movement in the trees. A shadow here, a flicker there. Her heart would leap, but when she blinked, the figure was gone. Perhaps he watched her unseen. Perhaps he waited for her to be brave enough to step beyond the fence again. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, she sat on the porch, her hands raw from work, her spirit aching with loneliness. The air was quiet except for the call of crickets. And then, faint as the brush of wind, she heard it again, the same voice, low and steady, carried from the distance. She could not catch the words this time, only the rhythm of them, a tone. That made her pulse quicken. She rose to her feet, straining to listen, but by the time she stepped off the porch, the sound had vanished. She pressed her hand to her chest, torn between fear and longing. Why did she feel drawn to him? Why did his presence calm the storm inside her when nothing else could? She could not explain it, but she could not deny it either. At the same time, the man of the ranch grew harsher. His silence gave way to commands. His gaze colder each day. He expected her to fit into the life he had made, as though she were another piece of furniture dragged into his house. She longed to shout, to demand answers, but she bit her tongue. The truth seemed dangerous to speak aloud. And so, she carried the weight in silence, even as it crushed her more each day. Still, the memory of the Apache gave her strength. In the stillness of the night, she repeated his words to herself. She clung to them like a lifeline. You're safe here. She did not know if it was true. Not yet. But she wanted to believe it. The land around her began to change with the season. The grass grew tall, the winds sharper, the nights colder. With each shift, her resolve deepened. She began to watch more closely, to listen for signs, to wait for the moment when the choice would rise again before her. And then, one morning, as dawn broke pale and thin, she saw him once more. He stood at the edge of the pasture, still as stone, watching her with eyes that did not waver. The world seemed to fall silent around them, the sound of cattle and the creak of wood fading into nothing. She froze, her heart in her throat, the bucket of water trembling in her hands. He did not move closer, not yet. He only waited, as though the decision was hers alone. The ranch hand called her name from the barn, and when she glanced back, the figure was gone again. But she knew, this time, that it was no dream. He was real. He was near, and he would not vanish forever. The tension inside her grew unbearable. She lived two lives now, the one inside the ranch, marked by silence and chores, and the one in her mind, marked by whispers and shadows in the trees. She was caught between them, torn by fear and the promise of something greater she could not yet grasp. The days blurred into weeks, each one sharpening the edge of her choice. She could not remain in the wrong life forever. She knew, deep in her bones, that a reckoning was coming, and when it came, the path she chose would shape everything that followed. But for now, she waited, restless and uncertain, listening for the whisper that had already begun to change her fate. The mornings grew colder, the air sharp enough to sting her cheeks as she stepped outside with the water pail. Frost clung to the edges of the fence posts, silvering the wood in a way that made the land look both beautiful and unforgiving. She breathed in the quiet, listening to the steady crunch of her boots on frozen grass. But beneath the silence of the ranch, her heart beat with a restless rhythm, an echo of a voice that refused to fade. She had not seen him again, not fully, though she felt his presence like a shadow just out of reach. Sometimes, when she bent to draw water from the well, she swore she could sense eyes watching from the tree line. Other times, in the hush of dusk, she thought she heard the faintest whisper carried on the wind. It unsettled her, yet it also steadied her in ways she could not explain. While the man of the ranch barked orders and treated her like a possession, the memory of the Apache's voice reminded her that she was still more than that, still someone. With a soul worth guarding, the man who now claimed her had grown harder as the days shortened. His silence turned to suspicion, his suspicion to anger. He accused her of idling when she paused too long at the edge of the pasture. He scolded her when she burned the bread, even though the stove was near impossible to manage. His words were not shouted, but cold, sharp, meant to wound in quiet ways. She carried the weight of them like stones, and yet she did not bend as he expected. Instead, she kept her silence and watched, learning more about him with every glance. He was not a man driven by kindness. His ranch was not a place of warmth, but a fortress built on control. The workers obeyed him without question, though she noticed the fear in their eyes when he passed. They worked hard but never lingered, never laughed. At night, the house echoed with emptiness, the kind that no fire could fill. She began to suspect that he had wanted a bride not for companionship but for control. Someone to fill the quiet and serve without question. But she was not made for silence alone. Each night as she lay awake staring at the beams above her bed, her thoughts returned to the figure in the rain, the whisper that had broken through her fear. She wondered what he had seen in her, why he had chosen to speak at all. The stories she had been told painted his people as shadows in the hills, fierce and merciless. Yet his eyes had not carried hatred. It carried something deeper, something she still could not name. As the days stretched on, small signs began to appear. Once, while gathering wood near the edge of the trees, she found a feather tucked into the bark of a fallen log. Its colors were rich, dark with streaks of bronze, unlike any bird she had seen near the ranch. Another time, while hanging laundry, she noticed a smooth stone placed on the fence post, carved faintly with markings she did not understand. She touched it with trembling fingers, her chest tightening. They were not accidents or messages, but messages of warning or of hope. She did not know. Her mind turned restless with questions. Was he watching her because he meant to protect her, or because he had some plan she could not yet see? Did he know she had been sent to the wrong ranch? That she lived under a man who had no claim to her? Or had fate simply crossed their paths in a storm, binding her to a stranger with nothing more than a whisper? The tension pulled at her until she could no longer keep still. One evening, when the ranch hands were busy with the herd and the man of the house rode off to town, she stepped quietly beyond the fence. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the trees, each step daring, each breath sharp with fear and anticipation. She did not know if he would come. She did not know if she was foolish to even hope, but the pull inside her was too strong to ignore. The forest swallowed her in its hush, the air cooler beneath the canopy. She paused, straining to hear. At first only the rustle of leaves and the call of a distant bird, and then faint but certain, the sound of footsteps, not her own. She turned, her breath catching, and there he was. This time, he he did not vanish like smoke. He stood before her, tall and still, the fading light catching on the lines of his face. She could see him clearly, the strength in his frame, the calm etched into his eyes. He said nothing at first, only let the silence settle between them. Her throat tightened, but before she could speak, he lifted his hand in the same gentle motion as before, as though reminding her not to fear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling more from the weight of the moment than from fear. His eyes searched hers, steady and unreadable. Then, in a voice deep and quiet, he answered, "Neither should you." Her heart stumbled. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before the words could form, the sound of a horse echoed. In the distance, panic rose in her chest. The man of the ranch had returned sooner than expected. Apache's gaze sharpened, and without a word, he melted back into the trees. She stood frozen, torn between running and waiting, her pulse hammering in her ears. By the time she turned back toward the ranch, he was gone once more, leaving only the echo of his words to burn inside her. Back at the house, she forced herself to move as though nothing had happened. She stirred the stew, folded the linens, and kept her eyes low when the man questioned why she had wandered near the woods. She lied with a straight face, saying she had only gone for more kindling. He studied her with narrowed eyes, suspicion heavy in his gaze, but said nothing more. Still, she felt the danger growing sharper. The days that followed carried an uneasy rhythm. She could no longer ignore the tension coiling tighter around her life. The man's temper grew shorter, the workers quieter. She noticed how they glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking, as if they too sensed that she did not belong there. And in the quiet spaces of her heart, she felt the pull of the Apache's presence stronger each day. But danger did not wait silently. One afternoon, while she carried water from the well, she heard the ranch hands muttering near the barn. Their voices were low, but she caught fragments raids, sightings near the hills, watching us. Her pulse quickened as she pieced the words together. The tension between the ranch and the Apache was more than whispers. It was building, pressing closer, and she stood in the center of it, whether she wished to or not. That night, as the wind howled outside, she lay awake once more. Her mind churned with questions, her body tense with unease. She could not tell the man who claimed her what she had seen, what she had heard. He would not believe her. He would twist it, use it as proof that she was untrustworthy. She was trapped. In silence, torn between two worlds that were on the verge of colliding. And yet, in that silence, she could not shake the memory of his words. "Neither should you." The truth in them cut deep. She did not belong to the ranch, to the man who had claimed her by mistake. She belonged to something else, something she could not yet name. But finding it would mean stepping into danger, into shadows, into the unknown. The storm outside rattled the windows, and in its roar she thought she heard it again, the faintest whisper, like a vow carried on the wind. It filled her chest, stirred her blood, and reminded her of the truth she could no longer deny. Her world was shifting. The walls of the ranch were no longer safe. The man who claimed her was no longer the greatest threat. The real conflict was coming, as sure as the storm clouds gathering over the prairie. And when it came, she would have to choose, not just where she stood, but who she truly was. The prairie seemed to hold its breath in those days, every sunrise edged with unease. She felt it in the way the workers moved faster than before, there, eyes darting toward the horizon, as though expecting riders to appear at any moment. She felt it in the silence of the man who claimed her, his voice sharper when he spoke, his hand always resting near the rifle propped by the door. And she felt it most in her own chest, where her heartbeat never settled, always waiting for something unseen to strike. The nights grew harder. She would lie awake in the narrow bed, the sound of the wind through the shutters like whispers she could almost understand. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps outside the house, though when she looked, no one was there. The ranch was surrounded by shadows now, not all of them belonging to the trees. Yet in that unease, she still found herself, listening, always listening, for the voice that had anchored her before. The memory of the Apache's words followed her into every dream, into every waking thought. One morning, she gathered eggs from the hen house. She overheard two ranch hands speaking in hushed tones by the fence. Their words carried heavy meaning. Even in fragments, spotted riders on the ridge. They're watching us. Boss says if they come near, we strike first. The other man muttered something she could not catch, his eyes flicking toward the hills where the horizon shimmered in the distance. Her stomach tightened. Whatever was building between the ranch and the Apache was no longer rumor. It was close, breathing down their necks. That evening, she lingered at the edge of the fields, unable to shake the tension pressing in. The sky burned red with sunset, casting the world in firelight. She knew she was being watched. She could feel it as sure as the chill that crept across her skin. And then, as if pulled by some unseen thread, she turned to the line of trees. He was there, not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but clear as the setting sun. His figure stood tall, his eyes locked on hers, with an intensity that made her breath falter for a long moment. Neither moved. Then he lifted his hand in the same slow gesture, the quiet promise not to fear. Something inside her broke free then. The silence she had carried too long, the weight pressing down on her chest. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, though her voice could not have carried across the field. Still, somehow, she felt. He heard. His gaze softened, though his face remained unreadable. And then, with the same calm as before, he turned toward the hills, as though urging her to follow. To see beyond the narrow world of the ranch, her heart pulled toward him, but the sound of hoofbeats broke the moment. She spun around to see the man of the ranch riding back from the far side of the pasture, his horse lathered with sweat, his face dark with suspicion. When she turned back to the trees, the Apache was gone, vanished once again into silence. But the fire he had lit inside her burned stronger than ever. That night, the tension in the house grew sharper. The man asked her questions in a clipped tone: where she had been, why she lingered so long by the fields. His eyes studied her, searching for something she dared not reveal. She forced her answers calm, steady, though her hands shook under the table. The look he gave her before turning away told her he did not believe her. The walls of the house felt smaller after that, every creak of the floorboards heavy with suspicion. The following days blurred together, each one thick with dread. She worked the chores as always, yet her mind was elsewhere, caught between the world of the ranch and the pull of the hills. She noticed the ranch hands growing more restless, their talk sharper, their glances toward the horizon filled with unease. A storm was coming, not of weather, but of men. And she was trapped at the very center. One evening, as the last light faded, she found another sign. Near the well, tucked between the stones, lay a strip of leather bound around a small carving of wood. She picked it up with trembling hands. The carving was simple, a figure with arms outstretched, but it carried meaning she could not grasp. She hid it quickly beneath her apron before anyone could see, her pulse racing. It was no accident. It was a message meant for her. That night, she could not rest. She rose from her bed and slipped outside, the cold air biting her skin. The sky above was wide and filled with stars, the land stretched silent around her. She stood there, clutching the carving, waiting. And then, as if the night itself answered, he appeared again at the edge of the dark. Her breath caught. This time he stepped closer than before, the shadows falling away until she could see the lines of his face, the steady calm in his eyes. He did not reach for her, did not try to claim her. He only spoke in that low, steady voice. "This place is not yours, you know it." Tears pricked her eyes, though she did not know why. His words struck deep, sharper than the cold night air. She wanted to tell him everything about the letters, about the wrong ranch, about the man who held her here like a piece of furniture. But her voice refused to form the words. Dead. She clutched the carving tighter, as if it could hold the truth she could not speak, before she could gather her courage. A sound split the night, a door slamming, boots striking the porch. The man of the ranch called her name, his voice heavy. With anger, she turned, panic flooding her chest. When she looked back, the Apache was gone, vanished into the dark once more. Only the whisper of his words lingered in the air. Mixing with the thud of her heartbeat, the man grabbed her arm, his grip harsh as iron. He demanded to know what she was doing outside, who she had been looking at. She shook her head, stammering that she only needed air, that she could not sleep. His eyes narrowed, his face hard as stone. For a moment, she thought he might drag her back inside by force. But instead, he released her, his silence heavier than any blow. He turned away, muttering of untrustworthy women and the dangers of weakness. She stood trembling in the cold, the weight of his suspicion pressing down harder than ever. The days that followed carried the crackle of thunder before a storm. The ranch hands sharpened their weapons, stockpiled supplies, moved the cattle closer. To the barn, she heard their muttered talk raids expected, riders seen near the ridge. The man of the ranch barked orders with a fire in his voice. His suspicion now turned outward as much as inward. Yet she knew, deep in her bones, that this was no mere skirmish of land or cattle. Something larger was building, and she was bound to it, whether she wished it or not. Her heart grew heavier with each passing night. She could no longer deny the truth. The wrong ranch had not just stolen her promised life. It had placed her in the path of something far greater, something dangerous and unstoppable. The whisper of the Apache, the suspicion of the ranch, the looming conflict between two worlds, all of it circled tighter, pressing her toward a choice she was not ready to make. The tension reached its peak on a night when the wind howled fierce across the plains, carrying with it the smell of smoke. She stood on the porch, staring toward the horizon, and saw the faint glow of fire against the sky. Shouts rose from the barn, men running, rifles clattering. The man of the ranch stormed past her, his face grim, his voice sharp with command. The ranch was on edge, bracing for the clash they had feared. She stood frozen, the carving hidden in her pocket, the memory of the whisper burning in her ears. The choice loomed before her now, closer than ever, as the sky burned and the ground shook with the weight of what was coming. She knew the climax was near, a moment that would tear apart the fragile silence she had been living in. The fire on the horizon grew brighter. The sound of horses carried on the wind. In the darkness beyond the fields, she thought she saw once more the figure of the Apache. Watching, waiting, his presence like a storm ready to break. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might shatter. The world was on the edge of something vast and dangerous, and she stood at its center, holding her breath for the moment when everything would finally break. The sky burned red as the ridge lit up with fire. Smoke drifted across the prairie, the wind carrying the smell of ash and gunpowder. She stood on the porch, her hands trembling, the small carving hidden deep in her pocket. Shouts rose from the barn, ranch hands running in frantic lines, rifles in their grip. The man of the ranch stormed past her, his voice booming orders that cut through the night. The world she had been dragged into now stood on the edge of breaking. Her heart raced as she watched the glow on the horizon grow brighter. Horses thundered across the plain, the ground trembling beneath their hooves. She thought of the whispers she had heard, the feather and the stone left for her, the steady gaze of the Apache who had promised safety. It felt as though everything had been leading here, to this moment where fear and choice collided. The first. Shots cracked in the distance, sharp and startling against the roar of the wind. She flinched, clutching the porch rail, her breath shallow. The ranch hands scrambled into position, firing into the night though they could barely see their targets. The man who claimed her lifted his rifle with cold certainty, his eyes burning with anger, not fear. He wanted this fight, she realized. He had been waiting for it, but she had not. She wanted no part of this war between ranch and Apache, a fight built from pride, suspicion, and land that could not belong to any one man. She wanted freedom, the life she had been promised but never found. And most of all, she wanted the truth of the whisper that still echoed in her chest. The sound of hoofbeats rose closer, louder, until the darkness split open with riders. Figures appeared at the edge of the fields, their silhouettes fierce against the firelit sky. Panic rippled through the ranch. Shots rang out, men shouted, cattle bellowed in fear. The world became chaos in an instant, and she felt the ground shake with it. And then, through the chaos, she saw him. The Apache stood apart from the riders, tall and steady, his presence commanding even amid the storm. His eyes locked on hers from across the firelit field, cutting through the noise and the fear. He raised his hand not in anger, but in that same slow, steady gesture he had shown her before. The gesture of calm, of trust. Something inside her broke free. Without another thought, she ran from the porch, her dress catching on the steps, her breath tearing from her throat. Shouts erupted behind her, the man of the ranch calling her name, but she did not stop. She ran across the field, her feet pounding against the dirt, her heart carrying her faster than she had ever moved. Bullets whined in the air, smoke choked her lungs, but all she saw was the figure ahead, waiting. When she reached him, the world seemed to still. He caught her by the arm, steadying her, his touch firm but not harsh. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time she found her voice. "I don't belong here," she gasped. "Not to him, not to this place." He nodded once, as though he had known all along. "I told you," he said, his voice low but clear. "You're safe here." Behind them, the ranch burned with chaos. The man of the ranch shouted, his fury carrying through the night. But she no longer turned back. She clutched the carving in her pocket and held her ground beside the one who had whispered to her in the storm. The battle raged. But she began to see its truth. It was not a war of bloodlust, but of desperation. The Apache riders drove the cattle away, breaking the power the ranch held. Did not strike without reason, nor did they linger in cruelty. They came for what had been taken, and nothing more. The ranch hands, for all their firepower, faltered in the face of men who fought with purpose. When the clash finally ebbed, the ranch was left broken. The barns smoldered, the fences splintered, the men scattered. The man who had claimed her stood in the ruins, his face pale with rage, his rifle empty. His eyes found her across the field, standing at the side of the Apache, and in that gaze she saw the truth. He had never seen her as a person, only as a possession. And now that possession had slipped beyond his grasp. He shouted after her, a mix of curses and demands, but the words held no power anymore. She turned away, her hand still gripping the one steady thing in her life, the carving. The promise of safety, the whisper that had guided her here. The Apache led her away from the smoking ranch, his stride steady, his silence carrying more weight than words could. She followed without hesitation, her heart lighter with each step away from the place that had tried to cage her. The night air was sharp, filled with the scent of fire and earth, but for the first time since leaving her home she felt she could breathe. In the days that followed, she learned truths she had never been told. The man of the ranch had twisted the letters, intercepting promises that were never his to claim. The one she had been meant to marry had waited at another homestead, left puzzled and heartbroken when she never arrived. She had been stolen by mistake, or perhaps by design, into a life that was never hers. And yet, in that wrong turn of fate, she had found the path she was meant for. The Apache had not only watched her, but had seen her for who she truly was. Lost, frightened, but unbroken. He had whispered not to fear, not as an enemy, but as someone who knew what it was to carry the weight of survival. She came to understand. The conflict, too. It was not the simple tale of savages and settlers told in fireside warnings. It was a story of land, of pride, of promises broken on both sides. She saw the humanity in those she had been told to fear, the dignity in their fight to remain free on their own soil. And she saw the emptiness in the man of the ranch, whose need for control had destroyed even the little he had built. In time, the land healed, the cattle scattered, the fences rebuilt elsewhere, the fire of that night fading into memory. But for her, it was more than memory, it was transformation. She had walked into the storm with fear, and she had walked out of it with truth. The whispers of the prairie still carried through the wind, soft and steady. Sometimes, sitting by the fire in the evenings, she would hear them and remember the night the world had shifted. She would close her eyes and recall the first time she had heard his voice, gentle against the storm. promising safety when everything else felt lost. She knew now that life did not always follow the path of letters and promises written in ink. Sometimes it twisted, cruel and sharp, leading through storms and wrong doors, through mistakes and betrayals. But sometimes those wrong turns led to the right places, to the truths hidden beyond the fences built by fear. And so she lived with that truth, her heart no longer bound to the wrong ranch or the wrong man. She had found where she belonged, not in ownership or silence, but in freedom and trust. In the steady calm of a whisper that had carried her through the storm. When the prairie winds rose again, rattling the grass and bending the trees, she would smile faintly and listen. Somewhere in those whispers was the reminder that she had been lost once, but she was lost no longer. The wrong ranch had tried to claim her, but the right destiny had found her instead, and in the quiet of that truth, she was safe, always safe.